Hi, first graders. For math this week, we are learning about shapes. And you already know a lot about shapes, so some of this might be a review of what you already know, but some of it might be new vocabulary terms that we're learning. So I want you to listen and pay attention to some of those new words that we're going to be using when we're describing some shapes. The first kind of shapes I want to start with today are two-dimensional shapes, also called flat shapes. So your flat shape is going to be something that looks just like this. It's completely flat. It's not 3D. It's just a flat shape, okay? And then when we talk about three-dimensional shapes, we're going to be talking about things that look a little bit more like this, that are three-dimensional, or like this, okay, like a sphere. So let's start with our 2D shapes. What we're going to notice about two-dimensional shapes is that some of them have sides. And a side is a line that makes part of the flat shape. So we're talking about a flat shape. When we're talking about the side, we're talking about the line that creates part of the flat shape. Okay, that's what a side is. And then we're going to be talking about shapes that have corners. And the corner is where it's a point where two of those sides meet. So this side and this side meet together right here, and it forms a corner. So on our flat shapes, we have sides, side, side, and wherever those sides meet together is called a corner, okay? So let's take a look at some of our flat shapes. I want to make sure that you can identify these shapes and also describe them. So when you're describing a flat shape, you're going to use these vocabulary words, sides and corner, okay? So some of my shapes that I have here are not completely flat, but it's the best that I could find at my house. So this first one that I was showing you is a what? That's right, a triangle. And the triangle has three sides. Look, this one is a line, another line on the flat shape, and here's your third line underneath. So 1, 2, 3 for your flat shape of a triangle has three sides. How many corners do you see? Where the lines meet each other. They meet here, 1, they meet up here, 2, and they meet over here, 3. So a triangle has three sides and three corners. The beginning of the word tri means three. So that's why a triangle is called that, because of the three that it has. The other shape that you're probably really familiar with is a square. Okay, a square, when we're talking about a square that is a flat shape, has sides and corners as well. It has one side that is a line that makes part of the flat shape. We have the second line that makes part of the flat shape, a third line that makes part of the flat shape, and another line that makes part of this flat shape. So 1, 2, 3, 4 sides. Now, look at where the sides come together to form a corner. 1, 2, 3, 4. So triangle had three sides, three corners. Square has four sides, four corners. Looking at some of our other shapes, this is a hexagon. Hex means 6. So you'll notice that 6 shows up when we're talking about sides and corners for this shape. Remember, your sides are going to be your flat parts that are creating a line. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And wherever those lines come together, they make a point. That is your corner. So two sides come together and make a point. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 6 sides, 6 corners. This is a hexagon. So we have 3 sides, 3 corners triangle, 4 sides, 4 corners square, 6 sides, 6 corners hexagon. Another shape that I wanted to introduce or talk about is a rhombus. And a rhombus could either look like this or it could look like this. So both of these have 4 sides and 4 corners. And it's almost like a square, but the square has been tilted onto its side. Maybe this square is a little bit better because they're kind of the same size. So I wish I could hold this a little bit better for you. There you go. So it's kind of like a square, but the rhombus, the blue shape, which is a rhombus, has been kind of tilted onto its side a bit. But if you're looking at the square and the rhombus, you should still see 4 sides and 4 corners, just like a square. 1, 2, 3, 4 sides, And then the same thing with the corners. Look at where the lines, the sides meet together. 1, 2, 3, 4. 4 corners, 4 sides. Okay, so that's called a rhombus. So we've got hexagon, rhombus. The circle, I don't have a shape that's a circle, but you know what a circle is. A circle is different because, here, I'll use this lid here. A circle is different than squares and triangles because there are no sides and no corners. There are no, here's my Play-Doh lid, there are no edges. There are no sides, there are no corners. It is a continuous round line that makes a circle, so there are no sides or corners on a circle. Okay, so 0 sides, 0 corners for this particular flat shape. All right, this shape is called a trapezoid. It also has sides and corners. It has 4 corners, but it has 5 sides. 1, 2, oh no, 4. 4 sides. 1, 2, 3, 4. 4 sides, 4 corners for a trapezoid, okay? All right, so one thing I wanted to mention too is that you can see shapes in a lot of different forms, but as long as it has the same amount of sides and corners, it's going to be the same shape. For example, I have 2 triangles here. They look very different from each other. However, they are both categorized as a triangle, and the reason is because this has 3 sides and 3 corners, and this has 3 sides and 3 corners. Even if I'm comparing these 2 shapes, they are still both triangles, but this has 3 sides, 3 corners, this has 3 sides, 3 corners, so they are both triangles. However, shapes can be seen in different forms. For example, this one's shorter and smaller, this one's taller and a little bit skinnier, but they're both triangles because of the sides and corners. Same thing with squares. I have these 2 types of squares. This one is a small, this one is kind of a medium, and then even if you want to see, this one is a big square, okay? And those are all squares because they have 4 sides and 4 corners. It doesn't matter the size. If you are counting your sides and your corners and it has 4, then it is probably going to be a square, okay? And if you see that your square has been turned a little bit, kind of laying on its side, squished up almost like a diamond shape, then that's going to be your rhombus, okay? So the other thing that I want to talk to you about today is your 3-dimensional shapes. And 3D shapes have 2 different words that we're going to be using. So your 3D shapes are going to have something called faces, and that is going to be the flat part of your solid shape. So a face is going to be the flat shape that you see inside of those 3-dimensional shapes. And then you're going to see edges. So edges is the line where 2 edges meet. So we're going to be looking for those when we look at our 3-dimensional shapes here. We're going to be, they'll still have sides and corners like the flat shapes, but when describing a 3-dimensional shape, we're going to be using this word, faces and edges, okay? So let's take a look at some 3D shapes that I found here in my house. And then I have the magnet blocks, the magnetiles here with me, and so I've created some 3-dimensional shapes. And what's really cool about creating 3-dimensional shapes is you can see how those shapes are created. So for example, what I created here, does anybody know what this is called? This is a cube. And a cube is created of all squares. You can see that I used 1 magnet block here of a square, another square, another square, another square, another square. It's all squares. Every side is a square. So a cube is made up of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 squares. So when you put 6 squares together, you create a cube. And that is one of our 3-dimensional shapes, is a cube. Now, let's take a look at faces. So the faces of your 3-dimensional shapes are going to be the flat parts. And so every flat part of this cube is a face. So this one has 6 faces, 6 square faces. Every face that is a flat part of this cube is a face, okay? So remember that the flat surface of a 3-dimensional shape is called a face. And then the edges are going to be any of these, kind of like where the shape meets together and it creates this line across the top. This is an edge, this is an edge, this is an edge. All of these lines where the 2 edges are coming together. It's almost like how those corners were coming together, but for these, it's a line. It's not a point, it's a line where they're coming together. That's an edge, okay? So faces are your flat parts, and edges are those parts where they come together, kind of like a corner does, but it creates a line instead. So cube, that's one of our three-dimensional shapes. 6 faces on that one. And let's count the edges. There's going to be quite a bit. Hopefully I don't get lost here. 1, 2, 3, 4. So that's 4 right there. 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, I think. I'm not sure. I would have to count it. It's hard to keep track of all these edges because I can't really keep track of where I've counted. But there's a lot of edges because all of these flat lines are going to be those edges. So then our next three-dimensional shape is actually 2 cubes put together, and that creates something called a rectangular prism. So, kind of take this apart here. I have 2 cubes that I have created out of those magnet blocks, and when you take the 2 cubes and you put them together, it creates a rectangular prism. So rectangles are actually just 2 cubes that are squished together, So here's 2 squares. That creates a rectangle. So we're talking about flat shapes again. Your rectangle has all of these sides and corners. When you want to create a rectangular prism, you're just creating a shape like this, okay? So this is a rectangular prism. This has edges here where the 2 sides are meeting. So where the green is meeting the blue, that's an edge. And where the blue is meeting the orange, that's another edge. We still have corners. And we have faces, so the flat parts. This is a square face. This is a rectangle face. This is another square face. So faces for a rectangular prism, you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. A rectangular prism has 6 faces because it's the flat part. And then the edges, I'm not going to count those again because I'll probably get confused. But the edges are the lines where they're meeting. Sorry, my shapes are falling apart. Okay. Then let's talk about another three-dimensional shape, a cylinder. This is all I could find. This is from Lucy's Play Kitchen. Cylinders do not have edges or corners, but they do have faces. And this is the face of the cylinder. It's the flat part that is showing up, and it's a circle. So the cylinder is made up of 2 flat circles, here and here, and then we have it rounded. So this shape can roll really easily because of those circles and the rounded parts. However, there are no corners. There are no edges. There's just faces because it's rounded. So faces is that flat part here. So there's your cylinder. So we had square becomes a cube. Then we had a rectangle can become a rectangular prism. Circles can be used inside of a cylinder. And then another one we have is a sphere. And a sphere, you can see this is the same thing. This is just a ball that we have. I've got a few different kinds. Here's another one that we have at our house. These spheres do not have any sides or corners, okay? They are totally rounded, so they have 0 faces. There's no flat parts. Like the cylinder had, at least this part is flat at the top. This didn't have any flat parts, okay? And I think that's all I've got for the spheres. So those are some of the shapes we're learning about this week. So remembering that when you're describing a 2D shape, you're going to say sides and corners. 2-dimensional means that it's flat, like this, and then, or like the square. And then once you turn it into a 3-dimensional shape, you're going to use more of these words, faces and edges. And your 3-dimensional shapes are going to look something a little bit more like this, okay, or like the cylinder that I had here. And then you're going to talk about the faces, and then you're going to talk about edges, like when we had a cube where those 2 shapes meet together and they form an edge on the side. So if I was creating a cube where the green and the blue are coming together right there, it's creating an edge, okay? So look for some of these words and some of these things in your iReady lessons for this week, and make sure that you're getting on. There's blue lessons for every day this week. So take a look at those, and you're going to learn a little bit more about 2-dimensional, 3-dimensional, and all of those vocabulary words. All right, bye first grade.